The way station at Reach had been built by people who intended to leave, and it had never quite forgiven them for it. It hung at the throat of the Tessel gate like a knot in a rope, 3 great rings of scuffed alloy turning slowly against a field of stars so dense they looked spilled. Every hour, ships came through the gate with frost still smoking off their hulls. Every hour, ships went back out. Nobody was from Reach. Everybody was passing through it. The station had the particular smell of such places, which is the smell of soup that has been kept warm too long, and floors that have been mopped by machines with no opinion about mopping. The woman who came through the customs arch on the 14th hour of the station day was traveling under the name Sirandel. She was tall, even for a Thal-Vaerish, and she had made herself smaller by the simple trick of not standing straight. Her skin was the gray-violet of a bruise 3 days healed. Her coat was good wool that had been good wool a long time ago, and it had been mended at the left elbow by somebody competent and unsentimental. She carried a soft case with a cracked latch, and in the case, wrapped in a scarf, was a sealed jar of ash that was not her husband's, because she had never had one, but which served very well as a reason for an old woman to be traveling alone across a border in the wrong season. The customs officer scanned her chit and did not look at her face. Purpose of transit. Funerary, she said. Her voice had been trained for chambers with domed ceilings. She had spent 3 months teaching it to be flat. Duration. Until it is finished. The officer stamped the chit and waved her through without curiosity, which was the entire point of the coat and the case and the jar, and she felt, as she passed under the arch, a small and shameful flicker of pride at having been ignored. It was the 11th station she had passed through this way. She was beginning to be good at it. Her name, when it was written out in full, took most of a line and required 3 separate honorific brackets, and it was Sirandel of the House Thal-Vaerish, 9th to hold the chair, keeper of the Great Leon, sovereign of the 7 and the roads between them. 240 million people called her their queen, and not one of them, so far as she was aware, had ever given her anything. That was not self-pity. Among the Thal-Vaerish it was simply a description, and it applied to everyone. She found a bench on the concourse and sat, because her hip was bad, and because a woman sitting is invisible in a way a woman walking is not, and she watched Reach do what it did. Along her left forearm under the sleeve ran the tally bones. Every Thal-Vaerish had them, a ridge of 11 small round bones beneath the skin, from wrist to elbow, that a child learned to press and count on before they learned to speak in sentences. You pressed one when you owed. You released it when you paid. By adulthood most Thal-Vaerish had bones roughened and pitted from a lifetime of counting, and you could read a stranger's whole history by the state of their arm the way you might read a tree's rings. Sirandel's tally bones were smooth as river glass. She had been counting on them since she was 4 years old. She had never once had a debt she could not name to the decimal. In her inner pocket, folded in oiled paper, was a document she had not signed. It was called a Writ of Quarantine, and it ran to 11 pages, and what it did in plain language was close the Tessel gate and the 4 gates beyond it to human hulls for 100 standard years. It would not kill anyone. That was important to her. She was not a butcher, and she despised the ones who were. It would simply mean that the several thousand human ships currently working the long loops out here would finish their contracts and go home and not come back, and that the little world they had come from would find its one good road shut, and would spend a century learning to be a small thing again. It was a mercy, as these things went. It was the mercy of a physician draining a wound before it takes the leg. She had brought it out here to sign it in the presence of the thing it was about. That was her mother's rule, and the only one of her mother's rules she had kept without argument. Never sign at a distance. Go and look. Go and look at what you are doing, with your own face, without your guard and your seal and your 7 worlds standing behind you making everyone lie. She had been looking for 3 months. 11 stations. She had watched humans work and drink and cheat and grieve, and she had found them loud and quick and startlingly good at repairs, and she had found nothing whatsoever that changed her mind. Because the doctrine held, it always held. The doctrine was this, and every Thal-Vaerish child learned it in the same 6 words: no one has ever been given anything. It was not cynicism. It was law, and it was older than the chair. What the Thal-Vaerish had understood some 9,000 years before was that a gift is a claim. When one person hands another person a thing of value and takes nothing back, a debt is created, and that debt does not vanish because both parties politely agree not to mention it. It sits there. It bends the receiver toward the giver forever. It makes the receiver small and the giver large, and the giver, who is not a fool, knows this, which is precisely why the giver gave. The Thal-Vaerish had a word for it, velun. It meant gift. It also meant leash. It had always meant both in the same breath with no strain at all, and any Thal-Vaerish would tell you that a language which needs 2 separate words for those 2 ideas is a language spoken by people who are being farmed. So the Thal-Vaerish had done the honest thing. They had made it explicit. Under the Lean Code, any transfer of value that was not reciprocated within the term created an enforceable claim, a lien, registered, priced, and collectible. If you fed a starving man, you owned a documented portion of that man's future labor, and everyone could see exactly how much, in writing, and could argue about it in a chamber before an assessor. No hidden leashes. No sweet-voiced philanthropists with their arms around your throat and their names on your children. Just the ledger, open on the table where anyone could read it. It had worked. That was the thing outsiders never grasped. It had worked for 9,000 years. The Thal-Vaerish did not have beggars because begging was a contract negotiation and had rules. They did not have famines because a famine is only ever a coordination failure and the code coordinated. And the code had spread, the way sound engineering spreads, until half the trade in this arm of the galaxy ran on Thal-Vaerish paper, including, Sirandel noted with the mild satisfaction of an author reading her own book in a stranger's hands, the commercial ordinances of a scruffy little transit station called Ashen Reach. Which was why, in the concourse below her bench, in the food hall, a gelt with 6 fingers on each hand was serving out bowls to a queue of 40 people, and taking payment from every single one of them. And not one of those people would have dreamed of asking him for anything free, and he would not have dreamed of offering. Everyone here understood. A free bowl of soup is not free. A free bowl of soup is a lien with steam coming off it. Sirandel watched the queue for a while and thought, not for the first time, that she was very tired. She was 51 years old. She had held the chair since she was 23. In that time she had raised 2 worlds out of poverty and let one stay in it because the arithmetic did not close, and she had been correct every time, and she had never in her life eaten a meal that someone had not been paid to put in front of her. And if she was honest, and she had made a religion of being honest, at least with herself, at least at night, the reason she had been out here for 3 months in a mended coat with a jar of somebody's ash was not that she doubted the writ. It was that she did not want to go home. She became aware of the human girl at about the 15th hour, and only because the girl was making a noise. The noise was a rhythmic, patient, faintly musical tapping, and it was coming from a beverage kiosk 20 meters down the concourse, one of those squat automated things with a cracked display that dispensed hot liquid into cups if it felt like it. The girl was crouched in front of it with a panel off and a hand torch in her teeth. She was young. Sirandel was not good at reading human ages, but she was good at reading the way a body carries itself, and this one carried itself the way the very young do, all wrists and no ballast, as if it had recently been issued the arms and had not yet read the manual. 19, perhaps, 20 at the outside. Brown skin, black hair sawn off short and badly, apparently by herself, apparently with something meant for cable. She wore a hauler's coverall with the sleeves rolled, and a patch on the shoulder showing a flower Sirandel did not recognize, yellow, with too many petals. The girl tapped the kiosk's housing 3 times, listened, adjusted something, and tapped again. She was not repairing it. She was diagnosing it by ear, the way you would sound a wall for a stud, and Sirandel, who had spent her adolescence being tutored in 11 disciplines and had loved exactly one of them, felt a small treacherous warmth toward this stranger for that alone. A station maintenance drone rolled up and chirped at her. The girl took the torch out of her teeth. "It's the pump," she said to the drone. "It's not the heater. Everyone keeps writing up the heater. It's the pump, it's cavitating. There's air in the line if you just—" The drone chirped again and displayed a fine schedule. "I'm not charging you," the girl said. "I'm literally telling you for free. I'm telling you so that you'll fix it and then I can have coffee. I have a personal stake." The drone waited. The girl sighed, put the panel back on, tightened 4 screws with a tool she pulled from her hip, patted the kiosk once on its cracked face like it was a horse, and walked away without coffee. Sirandel wrote nothing down. She had stopped writing things down around the 4th station. But she moved one of her tally bones a fraction under the skin, which was a habit, and which meant nothing, and which she noticed herself doing and stopped. At the 17th hour, the gate went down. It did not go down dramatically. There was no shudder, no alarm, no dimming of lights. There was simply a change in the pitch of the announcement chime, from the 2-note chime that means a ship has arrived to the 3-note chime that means listen, and then a voice that had been synthesized to be soothing and had landed instead on board. "Attention all transit passengers. The Texel Gate is closed to traffic pending resolution of a phase instability in the western aperture. Estimated duration, 30 standard hours. All departures are suspended. All arrivals are suspended. Passengers holding tickets for departures within this window will be rebooked automatically. Ashen Reach thanks you for your patience." The concourse did what concourses do. It made a sound like a held breath let out through teeth. Sirandel did the arithmetic before the announcement had finished. 30 hours. Call it 400 souls in transit at any given moment on a station this size, of whom perhaps 150 had ships they could sleep on and food they could eat there. That left 250 people who had budgeted for a 4-hour layover, standing in a corridor, for 30 hours, on a station where a bowl of soup cost 19 chits and a bunk cost 60. She had seen this exact shape of problem 11 times in her reign at planetary scale with modeling teams and contingency reserves. She knew what happened. Hour 6, irritation. Hour 12, hunger and the first thefts. Hour 18, the sorting. Those with money buy comfort, those without begin to bargain, and somewhere around hour 20 a man with capital walks through the crowd offering food in exchange for liens. And by hour 30 he owns a small piece of 40 people, and everyone hates him and everyone signs. That was not a cynical prediction. It was simply what a system does when you squeeze it. Sirandel did not even resent the man with the capital. He was a valve. Without him you got hour 24, and hour 24 is worse. She settled deeper into her coat, and prepared to watch her own doctrine be demonstrated for the 12th time. Around her the concourse began to compress. People sat down on their cases. A Gelt family, the big mossy kind, the mother nearly 2.5 meters and hunched apologetically under the low ceiling, arranged themselves near a support pillar with the precision of people who have done this before, and know that if you claim your rectangle early nobody will argue. 2 Thalish traders in decent coats went straight to the bunk kiosk and bought 30 hours each without breaking stride. 3 human dockhands with the mustard-colored armbands of a laid-off contract crew looked at the bunk prices, looked at each other, and sat on the floor. At the far end of the hall, under a hand-painted sign that read the 9th hour, the Gelt with the 6-fingered hand stood behind his counter with a ladle in his fist and looked out at 250 stranded people, the way a man looks at weather. His name, Sirandel would learn, was Ossic. He had run the stall for 19 years. He had a sign on the wall behind him, laminated, curling at the corner, that had been provided free by the station authority and which was posted in every food service establishment on Ashen Reach in 3 languages, and it said, "Notice, under Ordinance 40, unreciprocated dispensation of goods constitutes registrable transfer. Vendors dispensing without payment are required to file lien within 1 shift. Failure to file is fraud against the registry." It was, word for word, a translation of a Thal-Vaerish statute that Sirandel's own great-grandmother had drafted. Sirandel looked at the sign and at the ladle and at the 250 people and thought, 30 hours. And somewhere behind her, out of sight, moving through the crowd, a human girl with badly cut hair and a yellow flower on her shoulder was counting. She was counting people. She had started at the pillar and worked outward, and she was doing it in 5s, on her fingers, with her lips moving, because she had never learned any better way, and it had never occurred to her to be embarrassed about it. When she reached the far wall, she started again from the other end, to check, because she was an apprentice engineer in her 3rd year, and the first thing anyone had taught her was that you measure twice. Her name was Merrow. She was 19 years and 4 months old. She had 1,206 chits in her account, saved across 3 years of a 4-year loop, and every single one of them had a job already. She got 62 the first time and 64 the second time, and split the difference, and went to find out what a bowl of soup cost. Hour 6 went exactly as Sirandel had predicted, which gave her no pleasure at all. The irritation arrived first, in the form of a small human man in an expensive jacket shouting at a kiosk about his connection to Perrin Gate, and the kiosk explaining to him in its soothing bored voice that his connection to Perrin Gate had also been suspended, and the man explaining to the kiosk that this was unacceptable, and the kiosk agreeing that it understood his frustration. It went on for 11 minutes. Nobody stopped him. By the end of it, half the concourse had learned to breathe again, because there is a strange comfort in watching someone else lose an argument with a machine. Then the concourse settled into the long gray business of waiting. Sirandel had wondered, sometimes, in the chambers with the domed ceilings, what her subjects actually did with their hours. It turned out that mostly they slept sitting up. The Gelt family under the pillar made a nest of their coats and put the 2 children in the middle of it. The 3 laid-off dockhands with the mustard armbands played a game with a marked deck that appeared to have no winner and no end. A Thal-Vaerish trader flossed his teeth. A woman of a species Sirandel did not know sat perfectly still for 4 hours with her eyes open, and Sirandel, who had learned to identify grief by its posture and not its noise, looked away out of an old and unexamined courtesy. And the smell of Osic's stall went out over all of them like a hand pressing down. That was the thing about hunger in a place like this. It was not silent. The 9th hour was a food stall, and it had a stove, and the stove was on, and Osic cooked because Osic always cooked, and the smell of it, root broth, the burnt sugar note of Gelt fry cake, something with pepper in it, went out over 250 stranded people who had budgeted for 4 hours and had been standing there for 12. At hour 9, Sirandel bought a bowl. She could afford it. Sirandell's account had been constructed with great care by people who understood how much money a widow ought to have, and it held 411 chits, which was enough for a bowl of soup and a bunk and a certain amount of dignity. She stood in the queue for 11 minutes behind a man who smelled of coolant, and in front of a boy who kept counting his own chits and putting them away and taking them out again. When she reached the counter, Osic looked at her with flat black eyes set wide in a broad mossy face and said, "Root or pepper? Which is older?" Osic's mouth did something. "Root." "Then root," she said. "It should be eaten before it turns." He gave her a bowl. She paid 19 chits. She went and sat on her bench and ate it, and it was not good, and it was hot, and she was aware, spoon by spoon, of 60 or 70 people in her line of sight who were watching her eat and pretending not to. Not one of them asked her for any. She noted this with something she was surprised to find was not satisfaction. The doctrine held. Of course it held. These people knew what a favor cost. The boy with the chits had counted them 4 times in the queue and then left the queue. The Gelt mother had gone up to the counter and asked Ossic a question, and Ossic had shaken his head, and she had come back and sat down and said something quiet to her children, and the children had stopped asking. Nobody begged. Nobody offered. 250 people sat in a room that smelled of soup and behaved with perfect, terrible, load-bearing dignity, because the alternative to dignity was a lien, and everyone here had seen what a lien did to a family over 20 years. This is what my code buys, Sirandel thought. It buys that nobody is quietly owned. It buys that woman's children not being someone's collateral by morning. She finished the soup. It sat in her like a stone. At hour 14, the man with the capital arrived, right on schedule, and his name was Corwin Basque. He was human, which Sirandel noted with the small, cold click of a prediction locking into place. He was somewhere in middle age, well-fed without being fat, and he wore the sort of coat that is designed to be read from 30 meters as expensive. He came through the concourse from the docking side, which meant he had a ship, which meant he had food and a bunk and no reason at all to be down here except the one reason. He worked the room beautifully. She would give him that. He did not start with the desperate. He started with the merely uncomfortable, a pair of young Thal-Vaerish clerks, and he bought them a bowl each and sat with them and made them laugh. And when he stood up, they were smiling and had each signed a 200-chit lien on a 19-chit bowl and a bunk, and they did not feel cheated, because he had made it feel like a rescue. Then he went to the next group with the clerk's goodwill on him like cologne. Sirandel watched him for 2 hours and understood him entirely. He was not a monster. He was a valve. He was doing, in a small, ugly way, exactly what the code existed to make visible. He was buying pieces of people in writing at a price in front of witnesses. Somewhere on his ship, there was a registry terminal, and every one of those liens was being filed properly. And in 11 months, a young Thal-Vaerish clerk on some other station would be working an extra shift and would know exactly why and would be able to name the number. That was the honest version. The alternative was the dishonest version, which was a man who fed you and smiled and never said the price out loud and collected it for the rest of your life in ways you could not point to. Basque reached the Gelt family at hour 16. Sirandel watched the mother's face. The children were asleep. Basque crouched. He had good instincts. He got below her eye level even though he was half her size, and he talked for a long time, and he showed her a slate, and the mother read it and read it again, and her big 6-fingered hands were completely still in her lap, and Sirandel found that she had stood up. She sat back down. It was not her business. She was Sirandel, a widow with a jar. And more than that, it was correct. 400 chits, call it, for 2 children fed for 30 hours at 11% against future earnings. It was expensive, it was legal, it was survivable, and it was better than hour 24. It was the system working. It was her great-grandmother's handwriting, translated, laminated, curling at the corner. The Gelt mother signed. Sirandel looked at her own arm under the sleeve, at 11 small bones worn smooth as river glass, and felt something she had no name for and did not want. Ada Merrow had spent hours 9 through 20 doing the following things, none of which Sirandel saw. She had gone back to the slow marigold, which was clamped at berth 41 with her whole life in it, and she had checked the number on her account 4 times in the dark of her bunk, the way you check that a door is locked. 1206. She knew what that number was made of. It was made of 3 years. It was made of not buying the good gloves and using the ship's gloves that fit her like oven mitts. It was made of 26 months of taking the second shift rotation because it paid 4 chits more and nobody else wanted it. It was made of a birthday she had spent in a maintenance crawlway with a sandwich. And it had a job. The job was this. 1,100 chits bought the journeyman's kit, the calibration set, the certified gauntlet, the sealed reference core that you were not allowed to borrow or share, and 90 more bought the examination fee at Perrin Gate. And if you passed, and Ada would pass, Ada had been quietly and privately certain she would pass since she was 15, then you stopped being apprentice third. You stopped being the one who got handed the wrench. You became a person a ship had to negotiate with. You became someone who could say no. Her mother had been crew for hire her whole life. Her mother had never once been able to say no. Ada had watched what that cost in 100 small rooms for 18 years. 16 months from now, at Perrin Gate, she was going to buy the kit. She lay in her bunk and did not sleep. And at hour 11 she got up and went back out onto the concourse because she wanted coffee, and the pump in the kiosk was still cavitating, and the boy who kept counting his chits was sitting under it with his knees up. Ada sat down next to him. She did not say anything. She was 19 and she was not good at saying things. After a while the boy said, "How long have you been here?" 3 days, my ship's laid over. Do you have a bunk? I have a whole ship, Ada said. I've got a bunk. I've got a shower with actual water. I've got a mattress with a dent in it exactly my shape. The boy nodded slowly. Ada opened her mouth to offer him the bunk, and then closed it, because she knew what happened if she did. Ordnance 40 was printed on the back of every hatch on the station. If she gave him a bunk, she would be required to file a lien within 1 shift, and if she filed it, he would owe her. And if she did not file it, she was committing fraud against the registry. And either way, this 14-year-old boy would spend the rest of the layover looking at her the way you look at someone who has got a hand on your collar. She had been on Ashen Reach for 3 days, and she had already learned to hate that sign. So she sat next to him instead, which was legal and cost nothing and helped nobody. At hour 19, she went and stood at the edge of the food hall and counted in 5s on her fingers twice, because you measure twice. 63 people, give or take, in that hall who had not eaten since the gate went down. She could tell which ones. It is not difficult to tell. They were the ones who did not look at the counter. Then Corwin Bass crouched down in front of the Gelt mother, and Ada watched her sign, and something in Ada Merrow's chest went very quiet and very cold, in a way it had gone exactly twice before in her life. At hour 21, 40 minutes before end of shift, Ada Merrow walked up to the counter of the 9th hour. Ossick was scraping down the stove. There was a rack behind him with 60-some portions of root broth in it, cooked at hour 6 for a rush that had never come because the rush had no money, and station code said cooked stock could not be held past shift, and at hour 22, Ossick was going to have to put all of it down the reclaimer while 250 people watched. He had been thinking about that for 6 hours. It had put him in a mood. "We're closing," he said without turning. "How much is the rack?" He turned. She was a head shorter than his counter was tall, yellow flower on her shoulder, hair cut with cable shears. "What?" "All of it," Ada said. "The whole rack. What's the price if I take the whole rack?" Ossick looked at her for a long moment. 19 a bowl. "Yeah, but that's the counter price. I'm not asking the counter price. You're going to dump that in 40 minutes and get nothing for it. So what's the price?" Something moved behind the flat black eyes. 18, Ossick said. "How many portions?" 63. Ada laughed. It came out wrong, a little cracked, and she put her hand over her mouth. 63. She had counted twice and got 63. "Okay," she said. "Okay, 63 times 18. 1,134, said Ossick, who had run a stall for 19 years and did not need a slate. Ada put her chit on the counter. Her hand was not steady, and she was aware of that, and she did not particularly care, because she had already decided at hour 19, and everything since then had just been walking. There's a thing I need you to do, she said. There's a thing you need to do, Ossick said. You need to file Ordinance 40. You dispense to 63 people, you file 63 liens by end of shift or it's fraud and it's my stall and it's my license, and I'm not losing 19 years for you. I know, said Ada. I looked it up. She turned the chit over. On the back she had written in engineer's block capitals in grease pencil because she had known she would forget the number. SCTHRA. Form 11C Fee 40. Ossick went very still. Form 11C, Ada said, quittance. It's in the same ordinance, it's 4 pages down, nobody ever reads to page 4. If the transferring party files a quittance at the point of transfer, the lien's discharged on creation. It never exists. There's nothing to collect and nothing to register and nobody owes anybody anything. She swallowed. It costs 40 chits to file. It's a registry fee. I'll pay it. You'll pay 40 chits, Ossick said slowly, so that nobody will owe you. Yeah. 63 people will owe you nothing at all. That's the idea, yeah. Girl, Ossick put both hands flat on the counter, all 12 fingers. Do you know what you have got there? 63 liens. Filed clean, they're worth that gelt woman alone. Bask got 400 out of her. You could walk out of here owning 10,000 chits of paper. Legal. Enforceable. Nobody would even think badly of you. That's the law. That's how it works. I know how it works, Ada said. I've been reading the sign for 3 days. Then why? Ada Merrow was 19 years old and had never in her life given a speech and was not about to start. Because I don't want to own anybody, she said. Can you just take the money? Ossick looked at her for 11 long seconds. Then he picked up her chit and ran it, and the total came up on the little cracked display. 1,174 chits, 1,134 for the rack and 40 for a form that 4 people a year filed on this whole station. And Ada Merrow watched 3 years go off her balance in the time it takes to breathe out, and what was left on the display when it settled was 32. There's a condition, she said. Of course there is. You don't tell them it was me. Ossick's hand stopped over the terminal. You tell them the station comped it, Ada said. You tell them the stock was expiring and the reclaimer's broken and it's free, take it, whatever. You tell them anything. But if they know a person did it, then there's a person. And if there's a person, then they'll feel it, and the whole point, her voice did something and she stopped and started again. The whole point is that they get to just eat, without it costing them anything, not even that. She pushed the chit across. That's the deal, she said. Take the money, don't say my name. And she walked away, out of the food hall, and sat down under the broken coffee kiosk next to a 14-year-old boy who was counting his chits. And she did not look up, because she was worried that if she looked up she was going to cry, and she was 19, and there were people watching. 30 meters away, on a bench, an old woman in a mended coat with a cracked case at her feet had heard every word. The first person to find out was a laid-off dockhand with a mustard armband, and he did not believe it. He had come up to the counter at hour 21:40 because he had watched Ossick start to move the rack toward the reclaimer and something in him had finally broken, and he had come to ask, not to beg. He would have said to ask. There is a difference, and every man in that hall could have told you where the line was, whether the gelt would let him have a bowl for 11 chits, which was all he had. And Ossick said, it's free. The dockhand stood there. Take it, Ossick said. Stock's expiring, take 2. Free. Free. What do I sign? Nothing. The dockhand did not move. He was a big man with a bad shoulder and 30 years of hauling behind him, and he looked at that bowl the way you look at a wire that is probably not live. I'm not signing anything, he said. I said nothing. Because I've heard free before, the dockhand said, and his voice came up, and heads turned all across the hall, which is exactly what he wanted, because if he was going to be caught in something, he wanted witnesses. I've heard free at Perrin and I've heard free at Cross 9, and free means I get a letter in 11 months, and free means they take it out of my birth pay, and I have been doing this since before you had that stall, so you tell me right now, in front of everybody, what am I signing? And Ossic, who had run the 9th hour for 19 years and had never once raised his voice in it, reached under the counter and pulled out a slate and turned it around and held it up over his head so the whole hall could see it. Form 11C, he said, quittance, filed at 2141 Station Registry sequence beginning 661, 63 of them read it. Nobody could read it from 30 meters. It did not matter. What they could see was the shape of an official document with a registry seal blinking green in the corner, and what they could hear was a gelt shouting a form number. And there is no sound in the galaxy less like a con than a man shouting a form number. The dockhand read it. It took him a long time. He was not a fast reader. This says the debt's discharged on creation, he said. That's what a quittance is. It says it never existed. That's right. Who paid for the food? The station, Ossic said, comped it. The dockhand looked at him. Ossic looked back with the enormous placid stupidity that Gelt can produce at will, and which has been getting them out of trouble for 4,000 years. The dockhand took the bowl. He took it the way you take something out of a fire. He carried it back to his two friends, and the three of them looked into it. And then one of them started laughing, and it was not a good laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has been braced against a wall for 20 hours and has just discovered the wall is gone. After that it went through the hall like water finding a crack. It went badly at first. That was the part Sirandel would remember. It did not go like a miracle, it went like a rumor. People came to the counter angry. They came ready to argue. A Thal-Vaerish clerk demanded to see the filing and then demanded to see it again and then demanded Ossic's license number so she could report him for fraud, because a vendor dispensing without a lien is a criminal and she was not going to be complicit. Ossic gave her the license number. She filed the report on the spot from the counter, and then she took a bowl and stood there eating it and shaking. The Gelt mother did not come. She sat under her pillar with Basque's lien on her account and her two children asleep in the nest of coats, and she did not move, until the dockhand with the bad shoulder walked over with two bowls in his hands and set them down in front of her and walked away without a word, and she looked at them for a long time before she woke the children. At hour 22:10, a boy of 14 who had been sitting under a broken coffee kiosk counting 11 chits over and over went up to the counter and came back with a bowl and sat back down and ate the whole thing without breathing, and the girl sitting next to him did not look at him once and offered no comment, and after he was done he wiped his mouth and said, "It's free," and she said, "Huh, weird," and looked at the ceiling. Corwin Basque found out at hour 22:20. Sirandel watched it happen. She had a good angle. He came out of the corridor with two more slates under his arm and he stopped dead in the middle of the concourse and he watched 60-odd people eating for free, and she saw him do the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was this. A lien is only enforceable if consideration was given. If the thing you sold them was free 40 minutes later from a public dispensation, filed clean, with a quittance, then you did not sell them anything. You sold them nothing at all, at 11%, and every contract you signed tonight was so much wet paper. He went to the counter. He was very calm. That was the frightening part. "Who filed the quittance?" he said. "Registry doesn't publish payers on an 11C, said Ossic. "That's the point of an 11C. "Who paid you?" "The station comped it." "The station," said Basque, "does not comp anything. The station is a rock with a rent collector on it. Somebody walked in here and spent 1,100 chits and then paid 40 more to make sure nobody would owe them for it. And I want to know who, because that is the single most expensive thing I have ever heard of anyone doing, and people do not spend 1,100 chits on nothing." "You'd know," Ossic said. Basque smiled. He had a good smile. It went nowhere near his eyes. "Fine," he said. Fine, it's a technical filing error. I'll take it to assessment. And he walked away, and Sirandel of the House Thal-Vaerish sat on her bench and understood, with the cold, complete, unwelcome clarity of a woman who has drafted law for 28 years, that the human girl with the badly cut hair was now in a great deal of trouble. Then a Gelt with 6 fingers on each hand put a bowl of root broth on the bench beside her and said, "Eat that, it's expiring," and walked off before she could answer. Sirandel looked at the bowl. It was chipped. There was a thumbprint in the grease on the rim. The broth had a skin on it already, and there was one piece of root sticking up out of it like a small brown island. She had eaten in her life, at the table of 11 sovereigns. She had eaten a fish that took 9 people 6 days to prepare and had been, she was told, worth a laborer's yearly wage per bite, and she had eaten it while 3 of her cousins watched her mouth to see what her face did, because what her face did was worth more than the fish. She had eaten in the field with her soldiers out of the same pot as her soldiers, which had been arranged and photographed. She had eaten alone in her chambers at 4 in the morning off a tray brought by a man whose grandfather had brought trays to her grandmother, and whose son would bring trays to whoever came after. And that was not a gift either. That was 9 generations of a lien so old it had become a family name. 51 years, 240 million subjects, 7 worlds. Nobody had ever given her anything. She picked up the bowl. Her hands were not steady. That was the hip, she told herself. That was the cold. She ate the soup, and it was not good, and it was hot. And about halfway down she had to stop for a moment because her throat had closed, and she sat on a bench on a scuffed transit station at the throat of the Texel gate holding a chipped bowl with a thumbprint on it, and could not, for the life of her, find the leash. She looked for it for 2 hours. She was very thorough. She had not become what she was by being sentimental about her own conclusions. There had to be an angle. That was not stubbornness. It was 9,000 years of evidence. A being spends 3 years of wages and then pays extra to erase the record. That is not generosity. That is a purchase, and you find the purchase by asking what got bought. Option 1, reputation. The oldest one. You give in the dark and you make very sure someone sees you do it. Sirandel had done it herself twice early when she was 24 and frightened. So she went and looked. She spent 40 chits of Sirandel 411 on a station clerk with a gambling problem, which took 9 minutes to identify and 2 to arrange, and she had the clerk pull every outbound message from berth 41 for the last 6 hours. There were 3, a supply requisition for gasket stock. A note to a Captain Mattia Oilaran reporting in its entirety that the pump on Kiosk 4 was cavitating, that she had told them twice, that they did not care, and that she was fine. And a message to an account registered on Earth, to a woman named Merrow, saying hello to her mother, reporting nothing new, noting that the gate was down for a bit so there was time to write properly for once, and asking after her back. That was all. No post to a public board, no message to a rating agency, no note to the ship's mess. She had told no one. She had told her own captain about a pump. Option 2, the vendor. A kickback, a private arrangement, a way of laundering something. Sirandel spent another 20 chits and got Ossick's books, which were 19 years long and boring in the specific way that only honest books are boring. And there was nothing in them but a Gelt who bought root in bulk and marked it up 40% and had, 3 times in 19 years, quietly written off a bad debt, and then written the write-off into the register the very next shift, in the correct box, because he had a license and he was not going to lose it. Option 3, and this was the one she came back to at hour 26, sitting in the dark of the concourse with 250 people asleep around her. It was aimed at her. She actually considered it. She turned it over for a long while. It was not impossible. 11 stations, 3 months. A queen walking incognito is the single most valuable target in 100 light years, and if some human intelligence service had made her at Station 4, then a performance, A beautiful, expensive, perfectly aimed little morality play staged 30 meters from her bench, complete with an audible confession of motive delivered to a gelt at a counter, would be worth 1,100 chits the way a battleship is worth a rivet. She examined this theory the way she examined everything, which was ruthlessly, and it fell apart on a single point, and the point was this. The girl had asked him not to tell. And then she had walked out of the hall and sat under a broken kiosk and put her head down, and had stayed there for 4 hours, and had not looked up when the dockhand laughed, and had not looked up when the gelt mother woke her children, and had not looked up when 63 people found out that the world had briefly, inexplicably, cost nothing. She had missed all of it. She had paid 1,174 chits for a thing, and then deliberately arranged not to watch it happen. You cannot fake that. You can fake the gift. Anyone can fake the gift. You cannot fake not wanting to see it land, because that costs the giver the only thing the gift was ever supposed to buy. Sirandel sat in the dark with an empty bowl in her lap and pressed, one after another, the 11 small bones in her left forearm, and found that she could not name what she owed, and to whom, or in what amount, and it was the first time that it happened to her since she was 4 years old. At hour 29, she went and sat down under the broken coffee kiosk. The girl was awake. She had the panel off again, and she was doing something inside it with a length of wire and an expression of settled grievance. "That is not your kiosk," Sirandel said. "No," the girl agreed. "But it's been cavitating for 3 days and nobody will fix it, and we're all going to be here another 6 hours, and I have decided that I am going to have a coffee before I die." "Is it repaired?" "It's bypassed." "Which is different, which I would explain to you, but you'd be bored." She squinted up. In the dim she was very young, and there were shadows under her eyes the color of the old woman's skin. "You want one, it's 4 chits. The machine takes chits. That part works fine, that part always works fine, that's the only part they ever maintain." "I have 4 chits," Sirandel said. "Well then." Ada Merrow hit the kiosk with the side of her fist, and something inside it changed its mind, and it made a noise like a satisfied animal. "Ha, there it is." She got up and her knee cracked and she winced, and she was 19. She fed the machine 4 chits and got a cup, and handed it to the old woman in the mended coat, and then dug in her own pocket, and came up with a small handful and counted it. And Sirandel watched her count it, and watched her put 28 of her 32 chits back in her pocket and feed 4 into the slot. They drank coffee under a broken kiosk on a dead station at hour 29. "You paid for the food," Sirandel said. The girl did not move, which was itself an answer. Then she said carefully, "The station comped it." "I was 30 meters away. You have a carrying voice. It is a curse. I have it also." Ada closed her eyes briefly. "Oh, good," she said. "Great. Perfect. I have not told anyone." "Are you going to?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you asked him not to," said Sirandel, "and I cannot think of any reason for that request that I understand, and I do not interfere with things I do not understand. It is one of my few virtues." Ada laughed. It was a startled, unguarded noise, and it made her look about 12. Sirandel set the cup down and reached into her coat and took out a chit, and it was Sirandel, and it held 351 chits, which was everything the widow had left, and she put it on the deck plate between them. "I ate one of your bowls," she said. "I am going to pay for it." Ada looked at the chit, then at her, then back at the chit. "No, you're not," she said. 19 chits. It is not charity. It is the correct amount. I am an old woman and I dislike loose ends." "It's not a loose end." "It is precisely a loose end. It is a transfer of value with no reciprocation, which makes me," and Sirandel heard her own voice do something she had not authorized, a small dry crack right down the middle of the sentence, "which makes me obliged to you. I am not comfortable being obliged to you." And Ada Merrow, 19 years and 4 months old, apprentice third, with 28 chits to her name and 3 years of her life gone in the time it takes to breathe out, leaned back against a kiosk she had fixed for free, and said the thing that broke the Queen of 7 Worlds in half. "That's the whole point, though," she said. "You're not obliged to me. That's what the 40 chits was for. I bought that, it's mine. You can't give it back." They sat under the broken kiosk for a long time after that. "Say it again," said Sirandel. "Which part?" "The part where you bought it." Ada turned the cup in her hands. "Okay, so, there's a thing that happens." She frowned at the middle distance, marshalling. She was not good at this, and she knew she was not good at this. When somebody does something for you, you owe them, right? Not legally. I mean here, yeah, legally, they've got the whole ordinance thing, but I mean the other way, the real way. Somebody helps you out, and now there's this thing sitting between you, and every time you see them it's there, and eventually you start avoiding them, because it's easier than looking at it. "Yes," said Sirandel. "That is exactly correct. That is the oldest true thing anyone has ever noticed." "Right so," Ada spread her hands, "so somebody has to eat it." Sirandel waited. "The thing has to go somewhere," Ada said. "It doesn't just vanish because you're nice about it. Somebody has to actually pay the cost of it not existing. That's the 40 chits. That's literally what the 40 chits is. It's not a fee, it's the price of the debt not being there. And I had 40 chits, so I paid it, and now it's not there. It's not sitting between me and that dock hand. It's not sitting between me and the kid. It's not sitting between me and you." She looked up. "It's in my pocket. It was mine to carry, and I carried it. That's the deal. You can't hand it back to me because you don't have it. I've got it." Sirandel of the House Thal-Vaerish sat very still on a cold deck plate. "Where did you learn this?" she said. "I didn't learn it, it's not a thing, I'm just—" Ada made an exasperated noise. "I'm just talking, it's soup." "Where," said Sirandel, "did you learn this?" And the girl went quiet, and then she told her, badly out of order, the way people tell true things. Her mother had been crew for hire. 31 years, 11 ships, never a share in any of them. When Ada was 7, her mother had taken a berth on a hauler out of Cross 9. And the hauler's owner had done a thing that was completely legal, which was to advance her the cost of her transit to the berth and put it against her wages at 9%. And Merrow had spent the next 4 years working off a journey she had already made. "That's it," Ada said. "That's the whole trick. That's all it ever is. You get someone at the exact moment they can't say no, and you help them, and then you own them, and the beautiful part is that they can't even be angry at you because you helped." When Ada was 12, they had been stuck. Genuinely stuck, on a station a lot like this one, when the ship her mother was on went into receivership overnight, and the crew found out from a notice on the hatch. 11 days. Merrow had a daughter and 40 chits and no berth. And a man had come to her on the 4th day with a slate and a good coat, and she had almost signed it, and Ada could still see her mother's face over that slate, the specific expression of a woman about to sell a piece of her kid's future because the alternative was tonight. She had not signed it, because on the 4th day the cook off a stranded hauler 2 berths down, an old woman, Ada never got a name, she was gone by the 7th day, had started leaving a covered tray outside their bunk. Every evening, never knocked, never spoke, 11 days. And Mum went and found her, Ada said. Day 6, got her name on the crew list, went down to her berth, and she was going to, I don't know, thank her, pay her back somehow someday, put it in writing something. And the woman wouldn't take it, wouldn't even open the door properly. Mum standing there in the corridor saying, "Tell me what I owe you," and this woman goes. Ada stopped, her jaw moved. She goes, "You don't owe me anything, you'll just do it for someone else," and Mum said, "What if I don't?" and she said, "Then I'll have been wrong," and she shut the door. Ada scrubbed a hand over her face. And Mum walked back down the corridor, and she was so angry. Do you understand? She was furious. She cried about it. Because she'd finally found something she couldn't pay for, and it just sat there, in her, for years. It sat in her for years. That is the leash, Sirandel said quietly. That is precisely what I would call the leash. Yeah, said Ada. Yeah, except. She turned the empty cup over. Except 3 years later Mum did it. Different station. Some kid off a broken tug, no birth, no money. And she fed him for a week and she wouldn't let him sign anything, and I asked her why, because I was 15 and I was a little monster, and I said we don't have it either, and she said. She had to stop again. She said it doesn't stop. That's the whole point of it, it doesn't stop. The Queen of the Seven Worlds sat under a broken coffee kiosk with her mouth open. It's not a leash, Ada said. It's the other thing. It's the exact opposite thing, and it looks identical from the outside, which is why everybody gets it wrong and why they wrote that sign. She jerked her chin toward the hall, toward the laminated notice curling at the corner. A leash is when the cost stays with the person who got helped. This is when the cost stays with the person who helped. That's the only difference. That's it. That's the whole difference between the best thing people do and the worst thing people do. And it's just, who's holding the bag at the end? She shrugged. She was 19. She had no idea what she had just said. Anyway, she said, it's soup. Don't make it a thing. If you make it a thing, then it's a thing, and then I wasted 40 chits. Sirandel did not go back to her bench. She walked. She walked the whole ring twice for 4 hours with a bad hip and a cracked case, while 250 people slept on the floor around her, and she thought about a boy named Dylan. She had been 11. Her mother had put her on a fast 3 days, no food, a standard formation exercise for an heir, intended to teach that the body's demands are a claim like any other and can be assessed and denied. On the second night, a kitchen boy named Dylan had come into her room with half a fry cake in his sleeve. She remembered him with perfect clarity. He had been maybe 14. He had been terrified. He had put it on the table and said nothing at all, because there was nothing he could have said that would not have made it worse, and he had left. And Sirandel, aged 11, had done exactly what she had been raised to do, which was to look at that fry cake and see it correctly. She saw a boy who had just tried to buy the future sovereign of 7 worlds for half a fry cake. She saw a leash being laid very cleverly, at the exact moment she could not say no. She had been so proud of herself for seeing it. She had reported him at dawn. She had never asked what happened to him. She had told herself for 40 years that this was because it did not matter, that the assessment would have been correct, that he would have been reassigned. She had told herself that it was the first grown decision of her life and the proof that she was fit for the chair. Under the sleeve, along her forearm, 11 bones worn smooth as river glass. She had been counting on them since she was 4. And in all that time, she had never once had a bone she could not name, because the doctrine held, because no one has ever been given anything, because there was no such thing as a debt without a creditor. Sirandel stopped in the middle of the ring corridor at hour 33 and put her hand flat against the bulkhead and thought. He did not want anything. He was 14. He had half a fry cake. He had walked into the room of the heir of his house at night with contraband in his sleeve and no plan and no leverage and nothing to gain and everything at all to lose, because there was a hungry 11-year-old in it. He had paid the cost himself. He had walked out without a word so that she would not even have to look at him. He had held the bag. He had filed a quittance, and she had reported him for fraud. The gate came back up at hour 36, and the assessment summons went out at hour 38, and by then the slow marigold was already loading for departure, and Ada Merrow was in the number 2 hold arguing with a pallet. Captain Mattia Oilerin found her there, with the summons in her hand. Mattia was 44 and had captained the marigold for 6 years, and had a face that gave nothing away for free, which was a useful trait in a woman who ran a hauler with a crew of 11, 7 of whom were under 25, because the young ones will look at your face for weather and you cannot afford weather. Merrow. Captain. Where's 1174 chits? Ada set the pallet down. There is no version of that conversation that starts well. I spent it. On what? Soup. Madia Oilaren closed her eyes. Behind her in the hatchway, Pell had appeared, because Pell was 18 and appeared wherever there was trouble. And behind Pell was Juno, who was 22 and pretended not to care about anything and had already heard, and the three of them stood there and looked at the girl in the hold. That was your kit, Madia said. That was your exam. Yeah. That was 3 years, Ada. I watched you do those second shifts. I signed the rotation. I let you do them because you asked me to, and I have thought about that maybe 400 times, whether I should have let a 17-year-old work herself gray for a certificate, and I let you because you wanted it, because it was the only thing I have ever seen you want. Madia's voice did not rise. That was worse. And you spent it on soup. 63 bowls of soup, said Ada. For strangers. Well, yeah, said Ada. That's kind of the if you know them it's just dinner. Pell made a noise in the hatchway that was not quite a laugh. Madia Oilaren looked at her apprentice third for a long moment. Then she held up the summons. Corwin Bask has filed against you, she said. Assessment chamber 4 hours. Ada blinked. Filed what he can't file. I didn't do anything to him. You voided 19 liens he wrote on this station in the last 2 days, and the assessor's office agrees they're void, and now he wants the value back from somebody, and the somebody is you. Madia turned the summons around. Unlawful discharge of registrable value, fraud against the registry. Ordinance 40, subsection 9. A party may not file quittance in bulk for the purpose of collapsing third-party claims. They're saying the 11 CS were an instrument. They're saying you did it to break his book. I didn't even know his name, Ada said. I didn't know he existed until. She stopped. Until when? Said Madia. Until I watched him make that Gelt woman sign, Ada said. Hour 16. Nobody said anything. Okay, said Ada. Okay, so I knew he existed. Madia put a hand over her eyes. Read the penalty, said Juno from the hatchway flatly, because Juno had been reading over the captain's shoulder the entire time. Read her the penalty. Madia did not read it. She said it, which was worse. Restitution, she said. Assessed value of the collapsed claims. Bask's book on the station runs about 6,100 chits. If it goes against you, you owe him 6,000 chits and you have 28, and I have got nothing to spare, and everyone on this ship has got nothing to spare. And when you cannot pay a registry judgment on Ashen Reach, they do not put you in a cell, Ada, because a cell costs them money. They indenture, said Juno. 7 years, said Madia, station labor. Reclamation deck. And I will be at Perrin Gate, and then I will be at Cross 9, and then I will be gone, and I will not be able to do one single thing about it, because the paper will be legal. The hold was very quiet. Somewhere aft the loaders were still working. Ada Merrow stood in the middle of it with grease on her hands and did the arithmetic, and it went like this. She had spent 1,174 chits to make sure that 63 people would not be owned by anybody, and the price of that, it turned out, was that she would be owned instead, for 7 years, on a reclamation deck, by a man who sold food to frighten people at 11%. She sat down on the pallet. Huh, she said, her voice came out very small. That's funny actually. That's really funny. It is not funny, said Madia Oilaren. No, it's kind of structurally funny, Ada said. And then she put her hands over her face, and Pell crossed the hold in 4 steps and sat down on the pallet beside her and did not say anything at all, because Pell was 18 and did not know what to say and sat there anyway. 30 meters up, on the gantry above the number 2 hold, in the dark, an old woman in a mended coat stood with her cracked case in her hand and listened. She had followed the summons runner. It had not been difficult. She had done harder things. She stood on the gantry and looked down at 11 meters of scuffed decking and 4 young people on a pallet, and she took, out of her inner pocket, A document folded in oiled paper, 11 pages, unsigned, that would close the Tessel Gate to human hulls for 100 years. She had brought it out here to sign it in the presence of the thing it was about. Never sign at a distance. Go and look. Go and look at what you are doing with your own face, without your guard and your seal and your 7 worlds standing behind you making everyone lie. She had looked. Behind her, quietly, the way he had been arriving quietly for 28 years, her chamberlain Telun said, "Majesty, the chamber convenes in 4 hours. If we leave now, the yacht can be at the gate before the assessment opens, and no one will ever know you were here." Sirandel did not turn around. "How much," she said, "is 6,000 chits?" "Majesty, to me personally, out of my own hand, not the chair's, how much is 6,000 chits to me?" Telun was silent for a moment. "It is not measurable," he said. "It is approximately the interest per second on the Great Leon." "Yes," said Sirandel, "that is what I thought." She folded the Writ of Quarantine back into its old paper, and put it away, and looked down at a 19-year-old sitting on a pallet with her hands over her face. "Telun," she said, "find me a copy of Form 11C. The assessment chamber on Ashen Reach was a converted cargo office with 40 seats bolted to the deck, and on the day they heard the matter of Basque versus Merrow, 39 of them were full. That was unusual. Assessment on a transit station is normally attended by the parties, a clerk, and whoever has come in out of the corridor to sleep somewhere warm. But the gate had been down for 36 hours, and 250 people had eaten a free bowl of soup, and every one of them had spent the layover asking the same question, and word had gone out that this morning somebody was finally going to say the name. The dockhand with the bad shoulder was there. The Gelt mother was there, with both children, on a bench at the back, taking up most of it. The boy who had counted his chits was there. Ossic was there, having closed the 9th hour for the first time in 19 years, and he sat in the front row with his 12 fingers laced together and his flat black eyes fixed on the assessor's bench. Prefect Enul Vess had assessed on this station for 11 years. He was Thal-Vaerish and dry and old, and he was, by every measure Sirandel could apply from the back row in her mended coat, an entirely honest man. That was the problem. A corrupt assessor she could have handled with a word. An honest one was going to apply the law, and the law was hers. Corwin Basque presented for 2 hours, and he did it beautifully. He did not slander the girl. That was the craft of it. He praised her. He called her admirable. He said, and Sirandel watched the room believe him, that he had no quarrel with generosity, that generosity was a fine and human thing, and that if the respondent had simply walked into the 9th hour and bought 63 bowls and handed them out, he would have applauded and paid for her drink. But she didn't do that, Basque said. She filed 63 instruments, sequence 661 through 723 at 21:41, 40 minutes before end of shift, 40 minutes after she watched me close a contract under a pillar. She researched the form. She wrote the number on the back of her chit in grease pencil, and the vendor kept the chit, and it is in evidence. This was not a warm impulse, Prefect. This was an instrument, drafted and deployed to collapse 19 registered claims held by me, and it worked. And I am out 6,100 chits, and if a 19-year-old with a grease pencil can void a registry book in 40 minutes, then there is no registry, and if there is no registry, then there is no code, and if there is no code, he opened his hands to the room, to the Thal-Vaerish assessor, to 9,000 years. Then we are all back in the dark, buying each other with smiles. He sat down. It was, Sirandel thought, the best argument for her own doctrine she had heard in 28 years, and it had been made by a man who sold soup to frightened children at 11%, and that was not a coincidence, and she was 51 years old and had only just noticed. Prefect Vess turned to the respondent. Ada Merrow stood up. She had washed her hands. Somebody had made her, probably Pell, and they had not come clean because they never came clean, and she stood there in front of 39 people with grease in the creases of her knuckles and no idea what she was doing. "Do you dispute the filings?" said Vess. "No, sir, I filed them, yeah, I did that." "Do you dispute that you had observed the complainant contracting prior to filing?" "No, sir." "Did you file them in order to void his claims?" Ada opened her mouth, and here Sirandel thought is where the girl says no. Here is where she says that she never thought of him, that she was thinking only of the hungry, and the room wants to believe her. And Vess is honest, but he is not immune, and she walks out. "Kind of," said Ada Merrow. Somebody in the third row groaned aloud. "I mean," Ada rubbed the back of her neck. "Not okay, not to hurt him, I didn't do it to get him. I did it because I saw that lady sign and I thought that's not going to stop, is it? He's going to go around this whole room. He's got 30 more hours and there's 250 of us and he's going to get all the way round. And I thought, well, if the food's free then there's nothing to sell. So he can't. So yeah, I guess I did it so he couldn't." She thought about it. "That's not the same as doing it to break his book, though, is it? He didn't lose anything he had. He lost stuff he was going to get." "That," said Prefect Vess, with the terrible gentleness of a man who likes you and is going to rule against you, "is what a claim is." Ada nodded slowly. "Right," she said. "Yeah, okay. Do you have anything further?" She stood there. 39 people looked at her. Ossic's hands were laced so tight the moss was white. "I've got 28 chits," Ada said, "so I can't pay him. And I know that means the deck, and I've been reading about it, and it's 7 years, and I'll be 26, and my ship'll be 4 loops gone." Her voice went thin, and she stopped and swallowed and pushed it back down where it belonged. "So I've been trying to think whether I'd do it again, because that seems like the thing you're supposed to work out. And I've been up all night on it, and I think the answer's yes, and I want to be honest with you, sir, that it's not because I'm brave. It's because 63 people ate and it's already happened and there's no version of the world where that gets taken back off them. You can't unring it. It's done. It's the only thing I've ever done that's actually done." She shrugged helplessly the way she had shrugged under the kiosk. "It was soup. I'm sorry, that's all I've got." Prefect Vess picked up his stylus. "The code is not cruel," he said, "and it is not kind, it is only clear. I find that the respondent—" "I would like to be heard," said an old woman in the back row. Vess looked up, irritated. "This is not an open matter. Who are you?" She stood. She did not do anything dramatic. She did not throw off the coat. She simply stood up straight, for the first time in 3 months, all of her height, and put her case down on the bench, and pushed back her left sleeve, and held up her forearm so the light caught it, and 11 small bones worn smooth as river glass shone under the gray-violet skin like a row of pearls. Every Thal-Vaerish in the room stood up. They did it before they knew they were doing it. Vess was on his feet with his stylus still in his hand and the blood gone out of his face, because there were perhaps 400 people alive who had tally bones like that, and there was exactly one whose bones were that smooth, and everybody knew the story. Every Thal-Vaerish child was taught it. The queen who had never carried a debt she could not name. "Sirandel," said Prefect Vess, and then remembered the rest of it and could not get through it and stopped. The humans in the room did not stand, because they did not know, and there is nothing in the galaxy more useful than a room half of which has fainted, and half of which is asking what is happening. Ada Merrow turned around and looked at the old woman she had bought a coffee for, and said, out loud in a completely flat voice, "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." It took 9 minutes to restore order. Sirandel let it take 9 minutes. She had learned, 28 years ago, that you never hurry a room that is rearranging itself around you. Then she walked to the front, past Ossic, past Basque, who had gone the color of paper, and she did the small thing first, because the small thing was owed and she disliked loose ends. "The complainant is out 6,100 chits, she said. "I am paying it, not the chair, me, personally, out of my own hand." She put her chit on the assessor's bench. "File it. Basque is made whole." He has no injury and therefore no standing, and this matter is closed. And I want it noted that I have done this so that nobody in this room can ever say the girl was let off. She was not let off. Every chit was paid. The registry is intact. Basque started to speak. You are made whole, Sirandel said, without looking at him, which is more than you have ever left anyone, and you will not get another word from me in your life. She turned to the chamber. Now, she said, the large thing. Telun said from the back, in a voice like a man falling, Majesty, do not. Sirandel took out the old paper. I have carried this for 3 months, she said. 11 pages, it is a writ of quarantine. It closes the Tessel Gate and the 4 gates beyond to human hulls for 100 years. She heard the room draw in. She let it. I drafted it myself. I believed in it. I still believe most of the reasoning in it which I once said aloud, because I am not going to stand here and tell you that I have discovered that humans are wonderful. There is a human in this room who spent last night buying frightened people for 11%, and he did nothing illegal, and he is not unusual, and he is not the exception. He is the rule everywhere. He is the rule on my worlds too. He is why I wrote it. She held up the writ. 2 nights ago, a human girl who is 19 years old spent 3 years of her wages on soup for strangers, and then paid 40 chits more so that none of them would ever owe her anything, and then asked the vendor not to say her name, and then went and sat under a broken machine so that she would not have to watch it land. She turned the pages once slowly in her hand. I looked for the angle for 11 hours. I bribed a clerk. I read her mail. I read her books. There is no angle. She simply held the bag and paid to keep holding it and did not want to be thanked, and when I tried to give her 19 chits, she told me that I could not because she had already bought that. She had bought my freedom from her, with her own money, at the counter. Like a bag of root. Sirandel put the writ down on the bench, unsigned. There is a word in my language, she said. Velun. It means gift. It also means leash. We have been very proud of that for 9,000 years. We thought it was wisdom. It is not wisdom, it is an accounting error, and I have just been shown where it is by a child with a grease pencil, and I am going to say it out loud now so that it cannot be unsaid. A gift and a leash are not the same thing, and they are not different in kind. They differ in exactly one place: who carries the cost afterward. If the receiver carries it, it is a leash. If the giver carries it and keeps carrying it and pays extra to go on carrying it and does not put it down and does not come back for it, then it is the other thing. And the other thing exists. It is rare. It is expensive. It has to be bought every single time by somebody out of their own pocket forever. But it exists, and I have eaten it out of a chipped bowl, and I cannot unlearn it. She looked at Prefect Vess. Prefect, she said, the great Leon, recite it. Vess's mouth worked. Majesty. Recite it. You are an honest man, and you have it by heart, and everyone in this room deserves to hear what I am. Vess closed his eyes. 9,040 years ago, he said, the House Thal-Vaerish funded the terraforming of the Seven. The debt was registered. It has never been discharged. It compounds. The instrument is held by the House. Sovereignty on the 7 worlds is, he stopped. Say it. Sovereignty is the collection of that debt, said Anul Vess. The chair is not a throne. The chair is a leon. Yes, said Sirandel. That is what I am. I'm not your queen. I am your creditor. 240 million people are on my paper, and they were born on it, and their grandchildren will be born on it, and every road and school and hospital I have ever given them was given at 9%. And I have been so proud of my arithmetic, and my arm is smooth as glass because I have never once in my life owed anything to anyone. Her voice did not rise. It went somewhere else. Because you cannot owe your own debtors. There is no one above me to be obliged to. I have been standing at the top of a 9,000-year ledger with my hand out all my life, and I have never been given anything. And I told myself that was because nobody has ever been given anything, and it is not true. It was never true. It is only true for the creditor. I made myself the one person alive who could not be given anything, and then I called it a law of nature." She held out her hand to Telun, and after a very long moment, because he had served her for 28 years and he loved her, and he knew exactly what he was handing her, Telun put the form in it. "Form 11C, said Sirandel of the House Thal-Vaerish. "Quittance. Filing party myself. Instrument the great Leon in full, principal and accrued. Beneficiary the 7 worlds and every person on them. Discharged on the record, unreciprocated, unconditional, with no successor claim, no reversion, and no thanks required or accepted." The chamber made no sound at all. "The fee is 40 chits, she said. "The fee is the whole thing. The fee is the price of it not being there afterward, and it does not come from the treasury because the treasury is the debt, and if I pay it with the debt I have not paid anything. It comes from me." She counted 40 chits out of Sirandel's account, which had 351 in it, and which belonged to a widow with a jar of ash and a mended coat, and she pushed them across the bench. "File it," she said. "Majesty," Vess whispered, "if I file this you are not the queen. There will be no chair, your house will hold nothing. Your cousins will." "Yes." 9,000 years. "Yes," said Sirandel, "file it." And Prefect Enul Vess, who was honest, and who had assessed on a scuffed transit station for 11 years, and who had never in his life had a thing worth doing, put his thumb on the plate, and the registry seal in the corner of the slate turned green, and it was done, and it had cost 40 chits. Ada Merrow from the second row in the enormous silence said, "Wait, was this about the soup?" They gave her the exam. Not as a gift. Sirandel was very careful about that, and it took her 4 days and a great deal of argument with a registry clerk to construct it properly. The station had a maintenance backlog 9 months deep and a pump on kiosk 4 that had been cavitating for 3 days, and a woman who had written it up twice for free. Ashen Reach hired Ada Merrow for 11 days at journeyman scale, because she did journeyman work, and paid her 1,190 chits, which was the market rate, and which she earned and which she could take, because it was wages. "It's still you," Ada said in the corridor on the last day. "It is arithmetic," said Sirandel. "You worked. You are paid. If you would like it to be a gift, I can make it a gift, and then you will owe me, and I do not think either of us wants that." Ada laughed, then she stopped laughing. "Are you okay?" she said, "like actually. You had 7 worlds on Tuesday." The former queen of the 7 worlds considered the question seriously, because it had been asked seriously, which was itself a novelty. "There was a boy," she said, "when I was 11. He brought me half a fry cake and I reported him, and he was assessed, and he went to a labor tier, and he lived to be 58, and he had a granddaughter who is now a fabric chemist on Varys and who has never heard of him." Her jaw moved. "I have spent 4 days working out how to pay her, and there is no way to do it that is not a leash, and I have had to accept that I am simply going to carry it. For the rest of my life. That is the bill. He filed a quittance on me 40 years ago in the dark without knowing the word for it, and I am going to be paying the fee until I die." She looked down at the girl. "So no, I am not all right. I am 51 and I have just found out what I am. But your mother was correct, and it is the most frightening thing I have ever heard, and I would like it read into the record of my worlds if I still had any." "It doesn't stop," said Ada. "It doesn't stop," said Sirandel. The slow marigold undocked on the 9th hour of the 4th day, and the gate was steady, and Ada Merrow had a certified gauntlet in a case under her bunk, and a captain who had not stopped looking at her strangely in 18 months to Perrin Gate. But before that, on the 3rd night, she came back through the concourse for her tool roll, and the hall was full again, the way it always was, with the next 400 people who were passing through and were not from here. And there was an old woman at the counter of the 9th hour, in a mended coat, with a cracked case at her feet, saying something to a gelt with 12 fingers, and the gelt was shaking his head, and the old woman was saying it again, and pushing a chit across, And Ada, from 30 meters away, in a hall with a carrying echo, heard exactly 4 words of it. Form 11C63. Ada Merrow stood in the doorway with her tool roll under her arm. Sirandel of no house at all glanced up and saw her, and for one moment the two of them looked at each other across a scuffed transit station at the throat of the Tessel Gate. Then the woman who had been a queen for 28 years and had been an ordinary person for 3 days put one long gray-violet finger to her lips and turned back to the counter, and quietly, and without her name, paid for everyone's meal.